Hello and welcome to this session. And in this session I'm going to take you through box diagram and show you how you can generate a box diagram, i.e. boxes within boxes or shapes within shapes, to represent some hierarchical set of data. Box diagram can generate a diagram based upon two different methods. One is using a reference index and the other one is using a parent-child relationship within two columns. To show you an example of the data around that, if I take the business capability record set that's been brought in, this column here has identifier, which is the reference index, and what you'll notice in the shape of the data here is it has a hierarchical construct to the values, cascading down with some sort of separator that separated the levels and the values within those levels. It also has a prefix in front of that, which it can also handle within the tool. The alternative method of bringing in data is using a parent-child relationship. So if we look here, curriculum design is the child of curriculum management, and curriculum management is the child of of core capabilities, and core capabilities doesn't have a parent effectively. So the data, that set of data, both sets of data are checked for integrity when we select it to make sure it conforms to the correct data. The only thing to notice where a child doesn't have a blank parent, but it can work out that it should have a blank parent, i.e. denoting a root capability such as core capabilities in this example, then it will actually insert a row within the data. It then removes it at the end of the processing. Now that's an important thing to note, because if you exit out of the parent or cancel out the processing midway through, it could leave an extra record within the data set. Now, to overcome that, you can refresh the data set for external source and it will get rid of that then. Okay, back to the actual generation. We're going to generate both upon two different methods. One's the reference index method first, and for that we need to select the page size we want to use, or both we need to select the page size. The page size is used by the generator, diagram generator, to work out whether it can fit the set of data and its containers onto before it gets to the edge of the page. If it can't do that, then it will actually start based upon a new column. So it's using the page size to understand what's that maximum size set. Okay, back here we need to select the record set. We're going to use this business capability record set we've just looked at, and go through, and it's going to prompt you for 3 fields. 2 of them are mandatory, the name and the reference index, and then optionally description. So the name is name, the reference index was the identifier we selected down here, and there is also a description column. Description is used as a comment on the shape, so it will appear as you hover over the shape. What you would have noticed is when I selected the identifier, it went through, looked at the data, worked out what was the prefix, what was the separator, and based upon working it out, looked at the structure of the data and worked out the hierarchical shape of the information that's in the record set. It's populated it into a hierarchical tree, which then allows you to deselect and select individual components or groups of components to exclude from the diagram. So this is useful if you only want to generate a subset of the records that are there. For this example, I'm just going to leave it all selected. Also, when it went through that data, it also worked out there are 3 levels, as you can see in here. And for each level, it's going to prompt you for what shape do you want to use from what stencil. So it looked at the stencils that are attached to the document, and has prompted you to select both the stencil and then the shape within the stencil. So I'm going to go through and select TOGAF for the inner one. The inner shape doesn't have to be a container type shape, but all the others do. In my data set here, they're all containers, but you could select some other shape that isn't a container as well. I'm going to select Archimate for the other two. I'm going to select container capability from that. This is just to show different shapes being used. I'm going to select value stream as the outer one. Okay, down the bottom here we have some parameters which control the layout, either how many shapes we will put in a column before we go to the next column. So basically you'll end up with 4 rows effectively of shapes before it will start another column to the right. So you'll see that when we get to the layout, but we can play with this, and we might do it in the next example. You can also choose an offset from the top and an offset from the left hand side to start. Offset from the top is used very useful if you're going to put a header in, so it starts the stacking of the shapes slightly further down. You can also specify the gaps, X and Y gaps between the individual shapes. The gap can be up to 10 mil, and you also need to make sure that you don't make the gap too small to make sure you don't get overlapping containers. So if you took this down to 0, you will get some overlapping container shapes, the outer ones from the inner ones. So you do need to leave some gap. 4 seems to be the right sort of gap for a sort of 3-level type hierarchical view, which is probably the main number of levels you would create. So it sort of defaults to those values. I'm going to go ahead and generate the diagram based upon those settings. And what you'll see is it will start to draw the diagram. As I said, it's got a stack of 4 shapes before it starts the next column. And it's worked out that this set of shapes wouldn't fit onto the end because it needs to not just have each one of these rows, but it has a container around the whole lot. So it said, well, I'm going to start at the beginning to make sure it fits onto the page neatly. So there you go. It's produced a layout. It reasonably fits to the page. So that's using the reference index. And I'm going to switch to using the parent-child. So I've stayed on the dialog just for speed. And I'm going to leave the A2 the same. It's already selected the business capability. It's going to prompt me for the name again, but instead of prompting me for a reference ID now, it's asking me for the 2 columns for the parent-child relationship. So the parent is the parent column, the child is actually the name column. Again, the description is the detailed description. Again, we have this hierarchy where we can select and deselect what we want in there. And again, it's going to prompt you for those 3 levels effectively. I will point out if I went through and I deselected, I'm just going to do this for example very quickly. I'm going to deselect that. You've noticed now that it's actually grayed out some of these because what it's looked at is what have I got in the hierarchical structure, which I pretty much have nothing apart from the top level core capability now. But you can see it's changed the number of shapes it's going to prompt you for. So I'm going to select that all back in. And hopefully now we've got everything selected, so it's now going to prompt me again for all the shapes. So I'm going to go through and select what we had for the reference index view, so we keep it constant from that perspective. I think this was what I selected. But I am going to change the number of stacked shapes, and I'm going to reduce that to 2 just to demonstrate that clearly what's happening. I'm going to leave the space the same because it looked a reasonable layout effectively from that. I'm going to press OK again. So So again, you see it's going through, but this time it's only putting 2 shapes per column before it's thrown to the next column. And therefore you're going to get a very different layout effectively as a result of that. Okay, so here you've seen it's now generated. I'm going to exit out of that and zoom in a bit so we can see. On this diagram, because it was based upon, and as we can see here, we see the containers getting a little bit close together here. Because there was no reference ID, it hasn't brought that in, so it's only got the name effectively in here. But if I could flip that to the, I'll zoom in again. In this one, you'll see it's got the reference ID as well as the name. Now you can, if you click on the page and right click on the page, you can hide and show some of those attributes. So you can hide either the ID, or you may choose to hide the name as well. Well, that's probably not a good idea, but show the ID only effectively. So, and you can do that on the other page as well. So the choice and they're controlled in that way. As I said, there's no ID shown here because it wasn't selected in the data. And as I said, when you hover over these shapes, the description that you selected as well will appear as a comment. So that's a useful way. But the data as brought in, the description will be brought in as the shape data as well. So that's going to be connected to the diagram as well, both at the sort of detail level, but also the higher level containers as well. That's a brief overview. Thank you for your time.